Bitcoin and energy go together like two peas in a pod? Huh.
Everybody knows that, Dad.
Well, did you know that donkeys make great crew members?
What's going on, Wildcatters? Welcome back to another episode of the Wheel and Gas Stardust podcast. I'm here with Trevin and Justin from Energy X. This has been a long time coming. Trevin, we've known each other for 5-6 years.
It's been a long
and we're
time.
just now getting you on a podcast.
I know, it's ridiculous. We've both been busy.
I don't know how we've gone this long, but you guys came in from College Station, which, believe it or not, is actually where I grew up. And I didn't go to A&M.
But
that's one of the most
that's
shocking
a correction.
things.
I actually went to A&M, but I do not live in College Station.
Really?
I keep trying to get him to move.
I know he's been trying to get me to move.
So where are you out of?
I'm here in Houston.
Oh, you're in Houston?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Trevin actually had a neighbor down the street. His house went up for sale, and he's like, "Hey, you want to buy a house?" I'm like, "Dude, no."
What's your tie into College Station? And you just love it there?
I don't like living in big cities, first of all.
Okay.
And
Because you've been there for a while, right?
Yeah, we moved in 16.
Okay,
So
yeah.
we're crazy. We've got 6 kids. So when we had the 4th, I was like, we should probably move next to your parents. So we did.
That's a smart move.
Yeah.
That's a smart move.
At that time, I was actually commuting from College Station to downtown Houston every day. I was still working for Brightburn at that time.
You did that for about a year and a half.
It was a solid year and a half,
Yep.
maybe a little bit more.
Everybody thought he was
I'd get up
crazy.
at like 3:45 to get in the office early and miss traffic, and then they'd let me leave the office at 3:30, so I was home by 5. So the family didn't know.
Yeah.
From their side, I just didn't sleep very much.
Man, that's rough.
It was nice though, because like when it was the early stages of Red Team, it allowed me to have an hour and a half 2 ways. I mean, not many people were up at that time, so I couldn't do that many calls in the morning. But in the afternoon, I'd have an hour and a half of time to talk to people about business and work. So it ended up working out okay.
Well, actually, a lot of people learned that you were on the road really early in the morning.
Yeah.
So they actually started calling you at 5:30, 6 o'clock when
Yep.
you were on the road, thinking, Trevin's up and I'm off, so I can talk about this.
Yeah, that happened a
then-
lot too.
Once you stopped working downtown and you stopped commuting, people still called you at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, Missy
Oh.
was like, no more of that.
I'm so glad I don't have to wake up at 3:30 anymore. I did that for a while, and now I'm 7:38. I don't try to do that early morning shit anymore.
Yeah,
I'm over it. I'm old. I need sleep these days.
I like sleep. I still don't get that much of it, but I love our job. Like, it is so hard for me to quit and just like slow down. I enjoy.
It means
the work.
you're doing something right. So let's give everybody a little bit of context. What is Energy X?
So Energy X is a modular immersion cooled data center company.
Okay.
So we built this from the ground up, all of our own IP and everything. And really our focus is on providing compute as a service for just any company. There's no qualifier there. But especially anything that has any kind of high performance compute or you need a lot of processing, we're really going to crush in any situation like that.
So it looks a lot like almost like a Bitcoin mining facility, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they started out in 2017. The first version of the company was to mine Bitcoin. So what happened was back then, well, I guess in 2016, I read the Bitcoin white paper. Justin and I were working together at the time. I walked into his office and I was like, this is the coolest stuff ever. And so,
Yeah, you know those guys around the office that the management says, hey, we need to get those guys back to their office to get back to work because they're out planning another startup.
Yeah.
This was that moment. He walks in, he's like, we need to start a Bitcoin mining company and we need to do immersion cooled and containers and, have our own infrastructure. And I'm like, and I'm an oil and gas upstream engineer, production engineer.
And you were at Brightburn at the same time?
I was at Brightburn
Okay.
at the same time. So
Yeah.
Aggie petroleum engineer,
Yeah.
like standard career path, right? And this crazy guy comes into my office and he's like, hey, this is what we're going to do. And I'm like, okay, you go do that. I'm here to support you, man. I got your back, bro.
so the first time I went to him was at the time I always automated my job. So by the time I'd been in a job for maybe 6 months or 9 months, I could always get my job done by 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And I'd ask for more responsibilities and they'd be like, go sit in your hole. Okay, I'm gonna do whatever with my time. So then I started trading like futures and options. So I just had a whole trading portfolio I was doing, and that was fun. Read the Bitcoin white paper. I sold all that and started buying and trading Bitcoin. And then really by July, because that was May, by July, maybe that was 15, I can't remember which year, but I do remember that by July, that's whenever I started really getting intrigued with mining, because I was like, it's the exact same as oil and gas. Like,
Mhm.
you have to have a lot of capital. You have the lowest cost producer wins. Don't over leverage, and don't buy stuff whenever it's expensive. If you can just follow those 4 basic rules in either industry, you can actually do well. It's just that most people can't follow those 4 rules. So I was like, I understand this.
Execution is difficult.
Yeah. So I went to Justin. I was like, hey, we should do this. He's like, yeah, probably not. We don't know anything about it. So I said, okay. So then like 6 months goes by and I do a look back and I was like, dude, if we had done this, we would have already paid out. So
I remember that conversation.
I was like, I'm going to go do this. And that's where he's like, yeah, you should do that. I'll help you. And then, yeah, I ended up talking to friends and family, and it was like none of my friends and none of my family, but somehow, raised the first $1 million to mine Bitcoin in June of 2017. We got lucky. We bought those S9s for like $1,500 a piece,
Mhm.
and by December they were worth like $6,000. So we got our rigs online, and we got like 60% of our money back in the first month. So I looked like a genius, right? I'd had no idea, So before that, though, before we got all the money deployed and everything, we went up because I wanted to build a facility here in Texas or co-locate in one of the data centers here in downtown.
Yeah.
So we were looking at different data centers, met different con artists. I mean, it was a
That
whole-
was a funny story.
There's a lot in this space.
yeah, it was, and that was just in the
Oh,
data center
no,
space. This
no,
was a
this
tier
was-
3 data center.
This is a tier 3 data center. We had a con artist was advertising co-location space on the internet. I found him, called him up. First, his name was, I think, Mike.
Yeah, it was Mike.
Or Mike. And then his name was John. I forget what it was, but John told me that I needed to talk to Mike. And so Mike was the one that was actually, the in person, but they called me from the same number. And I was like, I thought it was like a company line. Like, I didn't really know. A lot of light bulbs should have been going off there. So we go meet him, and it's in a big name tier 3 data center that he
In
had-
downtown.
in downtown
Expensive.
Houston, like 15th floor, 20th floor, like legitimate data center. And he had conned the owners of the data center to give him the rights to some white space.
Yep.
And he actually even convinced them to build out for his projects his tenants that he had coming.
Mm-hmm.
And of course he was, the rates he was promising us were below market and not feasible at all. But we didn't actually figure it out until one day I started Googling his name and just saw all kinds of background stuff come up and whatnot. And so this was like 10, 11 o'clock at night. So I called Trevor and I'm like flipping out because we had just put our $10,000 worth of Bitcoin miners on the rack. And I'm like, okay, I'm driving up there to go get them now. And fortunately he wasn't there, but they wouldn't let me have them because I wasn't the person of record for that space. So we had to come back and we told them we had to do some firmware updates,
Something like that.
And so we go in there with the cart and, Trevins, of course, pulls him off to the side and is talking to him while his back towards
Just
me.
like-
And I'm just like,
pulling him off the rack,
pulling
sticking
him
him
off
in a
the racks,
backpack.
putting him on the cart, like wheeling him out. And then, of course, we let the security guard know. And he was over there in the knock, just watching from the window. And I'm pretty sure, we had some concealed carry individuals around and whatnot, but it was a fun experience, needless to say.
So that was early on. And then, so then we go and there's this company called Gigawatt up in Washington and they've got the cheapest rates. So I was like, well, we're going to go see these guys. We can't afford to build and compete with them. They're just, more competitive. So we go up there and look at it. And I had already kind of gone down the immersion stuff. And so we went and saw it, knew they had a good facility, met the CEO, all that checked out. The team seemed all good. And then when we were leaving, flying back, that's when I told Justin, I was like, these guys have the right idea. Like mining is how we should be thinking about compute. So forget about, don't completely forget about mining, but take the lessons learned and the ideas that these guys are really pushing the envelope. And let's do the modular immersion cooled data center. And it took a long time to build, like we didn't build our first one until about 2 years ago. But that was really the genesis, was seeing that in person. Like, yeah, this is doable. I see how these guys are doing things. We can do this.
So was theirs modular too or no?
No, theirs was just buildings.
You didn't check any building.
They were doing metal buildings, and so they had a prefab design, so they could erect them quickly, and it was modular in that they could scale. The issue that happened there is that so we start mining, we make our money back, luckily, What I didn't know at the time is that 90% of the company was owned by these 3 Russians. They were, doing some untoward things. Company ends up, the CEO calls me before they go bankrupt, and he's like, "Hey, company might go belly up. You want to make an offer?" So I came in, made an offer to him. I thought it was super fair. He voted for it. They voted against it. 17 days later, they declared bankruptcy. I tried to buy it out through the bankruptcy, went through this whole process. It was a nightmare. So then and that was whenever I quit working at Brightburn, was in like August of 17 or 18, something like that. I guess it'd been 18. And so then that fall was trying to orchestrate the buy of the company, and the trustee was extremely difficult. So we ended up walking away from that. And then going out of where it went from there we knew that this is where compute was going to go, and that this growth of compute was going to really accelerate over the next 10 years. But there wasn't a lot of evidence yet that machine learning was really going to take off. I think the current, like that first, 2010 to 2020 version of machine learning was really pretty difficult because it took a lot of human interaction. There was a lot of ways that it could get messed up because of people. I think we're moving beyond that now. And so my concern was that it's going to be too far out. So I need to build my own customer base. And so we took a two-pronged approach. We were trying to build this oil and gas tech stack, which I think we'll come back to later. That's really interesting, that allow us to do a lot of deep learning and provide a lot of insights that operators can't get. But it'd take a lot of compute, and then also build the data center stuff. Well, 2020 happens, and all that stuff, the companies we'd invested in, everything gets really difficult. So we're like, we're going to put that on pause. We'll just focus on the data center side.
So what was the conviction that you guys had to go all in on kind of the cloud computing versus mining? Because it's a rare shift that you see, right? Because everybody gets like so orange pilled, and they're like, this is the way, right? So I'm kind of trying to get. Also, I host the Energizing Bitcoin podcast, so you guys should go listen to that. So that's why I'm kind of like really, really interested. But like, what did you guys see, and what was like?
Well, I think let me grab this one. As a whole, we've always been compute agnostic. So there's a lot of solutions out there, a lot of providers. They're trying to solve for one problem, and even within the cloud space, or really the HPC space, or the data center space. The industry is very siloed. It's like everyone's got their blinders on. They're looking at one problem, one widget, whether it be a microphone, but nobody's really designing the microphone and the arm and the table and the whole thing. So we're very high level. And so we like to look at the whole picture, especially, Trevin's vision of compute, whether it be crypto, whether it be HPC, whether it be machine learning. At the end of the day, it's a chip. And so the focus and where we see the value is really the infrastructure. And so building out that infrastructure to support that compute, and being compute agnostic, and having a solution that can support an ASIC miner, a blade server, GPU server, CPU node, whatever you can imagine, that is what we're trying to solve for. And so that's also kind of what rolls into our cloud offerings of, we are agnostic to both the hardware, both, machine learning, both the software. We want to have a solution for all, because not everyone's problems are the same. And so having that wide variety and giving people options to solve their own problems in a way that fits their needs, opposed to trying to cram a solution, round peg, square hole, or square peg, round hole, however you want to, describe that. That's really how EnergyX kind of started, and why we can encompass everything.
So with Bitcoin mining, you've got ASICs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so are you guys more GPU based? Will I compute now?
So with the current, whenever you're talking high performance compute, it's really interesting in that it's extremely varied. You would think it would be I'm doing deep learning, so I'm going to want to use a bunch of GPUs to do my inferencing, and those are more efficient. But really what we have is we've got a lot of code software that's been optimized for CPUs. So you do end up having a lot of CPU usage, not necessarily because they're better at doing the job. It's just some of the software that was built is more optimized to use that type of a chip. I think that the use of GPUs is going to grow a lot. It has been. So yeah, it varies depending on what the customer needs. Guys are running websites. It's going to be a lot of RAM. They're doing a lot of RAM and a lot of network traffic for what they're needing. A little bit of CPU. So we'll cover the whole gamut of what those users might encounter.
And is everything you guys are doing immersion?
Yeah,
Yes.
100%.
So give everybody, if they don't understand what immersion is, for one, what is immersion, and two, like what's the point of immersion?
Point of immersion, just it's a more dense medium to remove heat. So instead of using air to pull the heat off the chip, we just use a fluid.
Yeah.
And it's just non-conductive. It's a little bit more of a challenge in certain ways, in that you have material compatibility issues around your hardware, so you got to be really careful about your fluid. There's a lot of different characteristics that you want in that fluid. And this is kind of Justin, where he specializes is on our fluid side. So we do have our own fluid IP. And I think you might want to touch on that.
The immersion allows you, and I think if you kind of tying in the question to crypto, I think where crypto really drove immersion and the problem that needed to be solved with crypto, and particularly ASICs, is the power density problem. So in a conventional air cooling system, an ASIC, they have huge fans, tons of airflow. And the reason they need that airflow is because the density of air relative to a liquid is just so much lower. So by going to immersion, you're creating kind of this, safe place from an equipment standpoint. So if you get your fluid, get all the compatibility right, it's happy there because there is no dust, there is no dirt, there is no water. It's just oil. And so then with that denser fluid, it allows for more efficient heat transfer. And that allows you, from an engineering perspective, to place this liquid cooled and immersion cooled piece of equipment in multiple places across the world and also in different environments. You don't need, like in a tier 3, there's a huge amount of water consumption. You don't need these big HVAC systems. It's entirely because you need those because of the air. So you have to get to a colder temperature on those refrigeration loops and things like that to be able to reject that heat. But with immersion, you just don't need all of that equipment.
So it's much more efficient from a cooling perspective.
It's much more efficient from a cooling heat transfer perspective, and also from a capital perspective of what you can do with that.
That depends on how you do it.
Yes.
So there are other companies that are doing stuff in the tier 3 space that are doing immersion. There's different types of immersion. So some of it's more expensive than traditional tier 3. Some of it's less expensive. There is definitely no rule of thumb or standard right now in the traditional data center space around immersion. They're trying to put that together through like the Open Compute project that Google has, and a variety of other, let's say, people within the industry trying to adopt similar standards. But Open Compute is probably the most well-known as far as treating standards.
So you guys are pretty much taking on the big cloud guys.
Yeah.
AWS, Azure.
Yep.
Well, who are a few other ones? Those are
I mean, it's really Google.
The biggest.
Yeah,
Google.
It's just the big 3. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got DigitalOcean and you've got a bunch of other kind of middle tier groups, but most people couldn't name maybe one or two of those, and their market share is not very large comparatively to the big 3. So
you guys just woke up and chose violence. You're like, we're going to take on
right.
the biggest guys in the world.
That's right. I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, their CapEx is significantly higher on a cost per megawatt than ours. We're able to manage our power costs due to our overall power strategy extremely effectively. Our cooling, for a typical air-cooled data center, you're talking 30 to 40% of your OpEx relatively speaking will be on that side, where ours is going to be about 7%. So you have a huge differential on that. And so your biggest drivers for any data center are cooling, CapEx, and power. And so we attacked all 3 of those initially from the ground up. So the whole build of the entire data center was to do an enterprise grade product with that in mind, even though we started out in mining.
So it sounds like you guys have really dialed in the cooling, and then obviously you guys are significantly smaller than a Google or Amazon or anything, right? So it's going to be cheaper, right?
Yeah.
Significantly cheaper. But what do you think that you guys like? What do you feel like was kind of like missing in the market with some of these big players?
Yeah, well, I think that a few things on what's missing. The first thing I would say is that part of what we're doing is building a platform. So in allowing other companies to be able to stack their infrastructure, their software, whatever, on top of our hardware, and have a way to get that geographically diversified in a very safe manner, I think is really critical. And so what we want to provide over time, and we're not there yet. I mean, we're just going to be launching our beta on EnergyX Cloud in Q2. So we're coming out with that shortly. But I think in the long term, the ability for these other companies to be able to come in and build and interact together in a very easy way of sharing data and being able to live within the same data center instead of shipping, a bunch of data over here to do something and coming back. It's like, we'll see. I've got, user A, B, and C. Here's the end users. Here's the other software. I can either cluster those together. I can cluster them next to one another. And so all of our data center management software was built around this idea. So we know exactly what compute goes where, who's got it, and how to utilize it. And then so your speed of traffic, like just all of it really starts to get unlocked whenever you think about everything at a hardware like base level, you know? And nobody's thought about it that way that I'm aware of.
So like coming from like being so involved in the Bitcoin mining community now, things like decentralization and like sovereignty and things like those are like really big common denominators with everybody in this space. And with you guys coming from that space too, do you feel like this whole like decentralization, like there's too much power in too few hands with maybe some of the bigger cloud providers?
I mean, that's why I love the Bitcoin white paper whenever I first read it, and I'm much more of a Bitcoin maximalist than any of the altcoins, and have always been that way. So I do think that the issues that you have with the big three are that centralization, right? Like if I am a person that just for some reason becomes persona non grata and they decide to cut my service off, I've got no recourse unless I back that up and I've already got an ability to spool up my website or do whatever it is that I'm doing, then I can have my entire livelihood shut down potentially based on...
We talked about this before we started recording. Like, I mean, the most famous deplatform we've ever seen was Trump, when he was president, got deplatformed from like all of the major social media platforms, which is completely crazy.
Right.
But then we started thinking about it, like with the modern demonization of like things like oil and gas, like what if all of a sudden we got deplatformed, and that like scared the shit out of me. I was like, man, like our entire business is built on our ability to be able to distribute content. And if we don't have that ability anymore, like that's kind of terrifying, because then you start to think like, they think that they have a moral compass.
That's right.
But it's like, who is really, I don't know, it kind of ties in like this whole censorship conversation of like who has the most true north on their moral compass.
And I think from our side, and that's what I like about people in the Bitcoin space, is we don't try to define what that is, right? I think from our side, it's just a very clear, either you're breaking the law or you're not breaking the law. And if you're not breaking the law, then it's none of my business. And I don't need to, unless I've got a court order or something, it's none of our business on what people are doing amongst themselves, And I think that that's a lot of what Bitcoin is about, right? Is that anti-censorship and the freedom of communication and choice around our money. And I think the same thing is going to happen on compute. I think we're going to see this commoditization of compute. And as that happens and people become more informed and they start making decisions, they're going to not just want to take, where they do certain jobs. I think what you're going to see is a change in how social media, how people interact, how people game, how people just do basic things. That's going to migrate. But it has to be built on a more, open platform that is much more fair to anybody who's going to interact, and then people are more comfortable as far as developers or companies on building out there. Like I wouldn't want to be building, if Facebook had a plugin, I wouldn't want to be building things on a Facebook plugin, because at what point do they decide for whatever reason on whatever company I have that it wouldn't work? And what was the social media company that Amazon shut down?
Parler.
Yeah, they shut Parler down. Which is crazy. It's just like, well, we just don't agree. So, I mean, they killed that platform pretty fast, and then people didn't get back on, not really. So, like, while it was really going through that growth phase. So, and it could be on either side. It doesn't matter. It should be a free market.
Yeah. It kind of, not to go down the rabbit hole, but to have a little bit of a meta conversation here. It's like, it's almost like things like that, like even things like internet access is, I think, almost like a utility in the same way that water and gas and everything else is, right? It's like, just because our power was out yesterday when we came in, and I was like, well, I have no power and I have no Wi-Fi. I can't really do anything that we do.
Right.
You know, so you think about like, what do you actually need to like conduct business? Like internet's very much a utility for us.
Yep.
Right. So, but then again, do you want to like, I don't know, do you want the government to come in and run all the internet? Do you want the government to come in and run all the hosting? Like absolutely fucking not. So
I think if you've got competition, you know, it's just going to take care of itself. I think we'll come in and undercut them, and we'll have the disaster recovery and the speed of, the other thing is just speed of operations, right? As things move forward for business, your ability to go from an idea to a prototype to a published, whether that's software or product, you 3D print or whatever, that time frame is, those iterations are going to get faster and faster. So the problem that your big three have as well, they've got pros and cons, right? But one of the problems they have, they're sitting on 15, 20 years of tech debt. So they built all this infrastructure on the best technology at the time. But we've progressed a lot in 20 years, you know? So to me, they have a competitive disadvantage there. What they have a competitive advantage on is people have built, they've got just huge market share, right? Everybody knows them. But also they've had a lot of people develop technology for their platform. So it makes it really easy to be like, oh, I need to do this add-in or that add-in. It's already there. But I think the nice thing is there's other software out there that I think is already starting to disintermediate that. So it's going to be like, oh, you've got your application over here, port it to me, you know? Like, I don't think it's going to be very hard. So yeah, I think that the space in general is going to move very quickly relative to the next 10 years versus the last 10 years.
Where do you guys see like the opportunities? Like what, like who are like the ideal kinds of clients? I know we talked about like maybe heavy compute stuff, particularly in oil and gas. You see tons on the G&G side.
Yep.
Like what other like kind of opportunity zones do you guys see for you guys?
I mean, any SaaS company, I think we're a great opportunity for a SaaS company, and especially in oil and gas, because then if you can run your jobs cheaper, and we can get you through your DevOps iterations faster. So there's multiple software platforms or applications that we're integrating onto our platform. One of which is a company called Kodiak, which hopefully will be at the Energy Tech Night. Kodiak is really great for DevOps, and they use Kubernetes. So all your version control, all spinning up your instances and everything like that. So that we just want natively built in. And you just like say, I want an instance of however much compute, and I want to pull in this software provider that does this awesome thing, drop that into the container. This other cool thing, like security maybe, drop that into my container. And then we just spin it all up. You didn't do anything. And what would have taken a guy weeks to months to do before, we're doing in minutes. And it's cheaper than what you get at Amazon. And then you just drag in your disaster recovery in there too. Like this is not available on the market.
So let's talk about I think the number one thing that people kind of think about with cloud compute is like uptime, right? And especially just being the modular nature of that. Like what can you say about the uptime side?
Well, the uptime, one of the reasons we went with a modular design is the ability to scale the product quickly and be able to deliver it in a very timely way. B, though, was relative to latency. And I think what you were kind of driving at originally was how do you get this compute to all of the necessary places as fast as you can? And that's really by having a very diversified footprint. And obviously we learned that from Bitcoin, you know, like the decentralized nature of that. Like, let's just totally rip that off and take that and use it as our own.
So you have the facility in College Station, right?
Yep.
And then you said there's another one that you guys are working on as well?
Yeah. So the private equity group that we're working with, so we will aggregate money for projects through SPVs. And so we'll have a variety of different backers that go into any one SPV. So the one that we're working on right now, our big project is in West Texas. So we've had Burns going through and doing all of our site engineering and everything. So we just got the information back, and we're going to be going out and reaching out to landowners to option that. So that'll be a 50 megawatt project that we do out there. He's also working on acquiring a data center. And once that data center is acquired, we're looking to put 6 of our units inside that tier 3 fence. So then that one's kind of nice because we can go to customers and say, hey, if you want to do your traditional storage here, because we're not really optimized for storage. That's like the one thing I'd say we're not really built for. We're just compute.
Yeah.
But if you want to do your storage, you can do that in here. And then we can sit outside, especially if you want something that's like super secure or super low latency, then that's an optimal situation for us to be able to do. And each one of our data centers does a ridiculous amount of compute. So having one customer take down a whole data center would be pretty crazy, even if they were doing G&G work or something like that.
Mm-hmm. How are you powering these things?
Yeah.
Or
So
is everything on grid? Is it off grid? Is it a mix? Are you power agnostic? Like,
I mean, we're power agnostic in that, you know, we like to use both renewable and non-renewable resources. So in that way, we're power agnostic, but we have to be relative to high performance compute. We need to be on grid because we can't afford downtime.
Yeah.
And plus, we need the networking traffic, so we can't be on like stranded wells or. And our cost per unit is extremely high relative to Bitcoin miners.
Yeah.
So them being able to come out there and solve the flare gas issue like Caruso does, you know, like that's going to be that, you know, they're going to have a bread and butter there that we won't. Our issue also relative to our infrastructure is it's just more expensive. So for me to build an enterprise grade real data center, I don't have the same economics that a traditional miner does. They're just doing it for a much lower price.
I'm surprised I never thought about this before, but when it comes to the cloud, how does the data transfer in terms of like internet and stuff like that work, right? So your facility, you're doing all the high compute between that and a client. How do you
do that?
Yeah, like how do you? I mean, like I understand if you're like literally on site and you're plugged in. I understand how you're optimized there, but over
so let's just do an example.
5G or is it something different? Or?
It's fiber.
Okay.
So let's say that you're in Amazon, an Amazon data center with, you know, however many instances you have for all your servers, right? And you decide, look, we want to do some deep learning on all the video we've shot, and we want to figure out whatever it is. So you'd be porting from your Amazon data center via a protocol that we have or that we're utilizing. Other people, we didn't come up with it. We're just implementing it. You'd port the data from Amazon over to our data center, and then you'd basically put it on our NVMe flash, store it there, run your job, and then as the data is coming out, you're going to be inside probably a Kubernetes or a virtualization container. Once that job's done, you ship it back to wherever it came from, and then shut down the instance, and your pay time with me is over. Or you could do it the other way, right? As you like, I think that's how people are going to start, right? Because if I'm a CIO of a company, I don't want to lose my job by doing something crazy. Like, hey, these guys are, you know, building these data centers and all sounds well and good, but you know, I've got a $5 billion company. Am I going to put all my stuff over there to start? Probably not. So I think with guys like that, you know, you say, look, let us do your HPC, let us be your DR, right? And then as we build that up, I think it's going to flip flop where we'll become the primary, and then Amazon will become the DR. But we'll have the infrastructure layer as code that enables that to happen. That's the key.
So is there fiber in West Texas?
Oh yeah, tons
Really?
of fiber. The main line that goes from LA to Atlanta runs right through West Texas. It's on I-20.
Oh my God, how did I not know that?
Yeah, so we're just going to sit on top of that fiber backbone.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, shit, you guys got it all figured out then. I was like, you have to run a whole bunch of fiber in West Texas.
You know what's really cool though is a lot of railroads run fiber, and then a lot of your pipelines now. If they're running like a big like interstate pipeline or an NGL pipeline, most of those guys run fiber now too at the same time, which makes sense. So you got a lot of dark fiber actually intersecting all over West Texas.
Interesting. Yeah, I used to do a lot of fiber splicing back in the Marines. We'd run fiber lines, and then somebody would literally walk up and step on it, and it's glass, and so it would just break. And then you have to chop out that piece, and you have this little thing, you connect them in there, and you fuse them together. And
I've watched somebody do that when they brought fiber into my house. That was always like, you know, kid in a candy store, watching him pull out all his tools and connect everything.
Seems a lot more glamorous than it actually is. When you do it like 1,000 times.
It's like one time is good enough, and then I'm done.
So where do you see you guys in, I don't know, 3 to 5 years? Like what's the goal?
3 to 5 years. I mean, you're talking hundreds of these all over the country. Maybe over 1,000. Well, in 5 years, I think for sure over 1,000 in 5 years. But in the next 3 years, you know, hundreds. And then I think the real question is, to me, is where does that compute need to be, right?
We've got to be very strategic about our locations. So like, you know, we may say West Texas, we may, you know, pick some state outside of Texas and it sounds like it's the middle of nowhere, but putting it in on an island doesn't really do anybody any good. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we've got to be strategic from a power reliability, from a comms, everything that the tier 3 data centers provide. It's got to be secure. Where instead of just one big building, it's a lot of small buildings.
Well, I feel like you guys are really strategically positioned because especially now with the emergence of like Chat GPT, right? And then possibly like GPT-4 on the horizon, which is like magnitudes greater.
Yep.
Tons and tons of like crazy high compute shit is happening in the world right now, right? To where, and Google just announced theirs based on Lambda now that OpenAI's, released Chat GPT. So like there's huge shakeups happening in kind of the compute world right now. So I would see
people are just now seeing this though. And so to them, it seems like there's this, and it is a complete,
it's not new, but it's just like, it just now penetrated the mainstream.
But they can use it finally.
Yeah.
I think the problem is like people were trying to do machine learning and it's like, oh, I've got to go and I'm going to do this one thing. And then I got to classify everything, and I got to have all these data scientists help me do it. Now we're automating that. Like I just saw, a few months ago, I saw this company that they've got a software. And so they told the software like, hey, it's a ML based software. I want you to build me, here's a design constraints, build me an injector nozzle for a rocket. The software built it, according to the video on YouTube, built this.
Engineers are going to get replaced.
I know, right? They built this entire nozzle. It looked awesome. Then they shipped it over to this 3D printing company. They printed it. And so it took one guy to build this whole, like, imagine if it was 50 years ago, how much time and effort that would have taken. It's like, oh, it took me 2 weeks on a GPU rig and, took me, 10 hours on this 3D printer, done.
I've heard stories of engineers at places like Boeing and, these big projects where they spend their entire career, working on a fastener, something.
That's gone.
Very
those days are so far behind us.
They are.
We even have John and our team integrated ChatGPT into our Slack channel.
Nice.
And so now the entire team is all day querying it. And so he's getting it. He's getting it to do like machine learning stuff, and he's building it into our tech stack. Other people are using it to write copy for social media posts.
Yep.
Or, we even went as far as to have we had it write a screenplay for a scene from Friends where Ross is on a drilling rig and insert jokes and everything. And you see this whole scene come to life. Like it understands how Friends jokes were written.
Yeah.
And like it understood the character. Like it's
crazy.
So wild. It's so wild. What a time to be alive.
All of this, AI, machine learning, as it gets released to the masses and everyone's trying to figure out how to use it and what it applies to, what it doesn't, that's going to drive the need for compute. So when Trevin talks about the hundreds and thousands in the 3 to 5 year, it's driven by this need for people wanting to do something dumb like make a Friends video. Like really, as far as adding value to society, it does it. That adds minimal value, and then the laugh, which I guess is good, but from the compute resources,
as an engineer,
yeah, I'm an engineer. But the compute resources needed for all those random ideas that come up is going to be exponential, and we're at the cusp of that. And so that's also the beauty of us, and the fact that we push all of our fabrication, to across the nation into fab shops, opposed to a traditional brick and mortar building. That's going to allow us to scale.
I think the interesting part about it to me though is on going back to what you're saying, just about compute, right? And AI and everything. If you look at how that looks, just imagine 2 years from now. Imagine how much things are going to change in 2 years. Like ChatGPT alone, what that can change. How many new companies are going to get built around that, right? If
there's dozens and dozens and dozens of new things that are now built off the back of that to do very niche things.
Every day on Twitter.
We're going to see hundreds, if not thousands of these pop over the next 2 years.
Yeah. I there's like this whole, like, how there's like crypto Twitter. There's basically like an AI Twitter too. Which I'm like all into. I never post anything, but I read everything. And there's like every day there's like this new awesome thing that somebody came up with. There's like, oh, I integrated this and I'm doing that. But to me, whenever you look at all that, there needs to be a platform like ours where you can do all your processing affordably, but you need to be able to collaborate. So like, let's say that I was doing something cool in the medical industry, right? Here in Houston. And I've got this really rich data set. I think data sets are going to become incredibly valuable. I've got this data set and I built this new ML product that went on top of that. Then somebody else sees I built it, then they could be like, hey, I'd like to, rent your data for a little bit. I want to license your data. So then you could monetize that. And then you got your compute and now they're sharing. And it's like, they could build an application that goes onto the other application. And as long as your infrastructure as code is built correctly, Like it's like your low code, no code, like the ability to just scale and iterate this stuff just gets so fast. That's what I'm excited about.
It's crazy. I got some stuff after we stop recording. I got some stuff to talk to you about on the low code, no code side. Like it's what not just like the speed, but also the cost. Like barriers to entry are going to be so low for tech companies coming into the space because you can spin up MVPs extremely quickly. You can go to a much higher produced version of the MVPs very, very fucking quickly, and it costs you practically nothing.
That's right.
It's mind blowing compared to even just like a few years ago, where it was like, oh, like because you think about the implications of like, I don't really know what the implications are going to be because now you don't necessarily have to go and raise as much money as you did before.
Especially
because
if you have
like,
a platform.
I need to do a $5-10 million Series A because 90% of it's going to development cost. Now it's like, what if you spend less than 10% of that, 5% on development cost?
And then what if you're on a platform that allows you, that already has a bunch of users on there, right? Like oil and gas companies or medical companies or whatever. And then you can just directly be able to see like, oh, there's X amount of compute that's already happening. Plug me in. I can solve this problem. Like how much does that cost from your point to do? Like once you have something like that, I don't know. It's like the App Store, right? Like, okay, I'm on iPhone and I push an app. It's like, well, people can just search for my app and I'm monetized.
This gets me excited about tech. This is like, what a time to be alive.
Oil and gas tech should really blossom over the next 5 years. Because I feel like it's been so behind.
It's
for so
always
long.
behind.
But it's like
It's time to catch up.
It's easy for us to say that coming from oil and gas, but as I've kind of like, dip my toe in other industries, it's just in conversations with other people on the tech side. Medical is just as bad.
Oh, it's
healthcare,
worse. Yeah.
like everybody's kind of bad. I mean, anywhere
Yeah.
where you just have large companies and the bureaucracy and all that kind of stuff, it's just slow to adopt. So I think it's just people.
Yeah.
People are resistant to change.
People are very
Manufacturing, though, to me seems to be much more on the cutting edge, because their margins are so thin. I think those that have survived have been like, well, we gotta get good at everything, So I think that they're a little more adept. I think companies like healthcare and oil and gas just have sometimes pretty good sized margins. They're a little more lazy. It's like, well, we should probably just drill more.
Yeah, exactly. So if anybody's listening, they want to find out more information about EnergyX, what's the website?
Yeah, just energyx.io.
Okay.
The truth is, like I said, we're rolling out the cloud version, March or Q2, somewhere in there. So we're having a lot of things happen. If you want to sign up for the cloud side, we're giving away a lot of free stuff there and then locking people into long-term contracts. We really want great companies to come in and beta test and give us their true feedback so we can make a great product. And then be happy to talk to any of them about, what we're doing long-term and why their company might be a good fit on there, besides just that it's a great value.
And you guys are both on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to them on there. Guys, thanks for making it down.
Thanks for having us.
This is a great conversation. I'm super excited.
Thanks, Jake.
All right, take care.